Longevity Junky. It's time to get your fix. I'm Nikki Lee.
I'm Buck Joffrey.
And today we talk with lifestyle medicine pioneer and Alzheimer's researcher, Dr. Dean Ornish. A deep dive into coffee, what the science says, and why it's controversial, and whether your morning cup is helping you or hurting your health. But first, how are you, Buck? Sorry I stressed you out.
I know. So Nikki, like 10 minutes before the show says, she sends a text, I'm driving. I'm in Colorado. She's like, bear with me. And then, because she's, trying to get back home or whatever, get to her place, she doesn't answer her text. So I'm like furiously texting her back. Should I do this interview alone? What? So anyway, what's going on in Colorado there?
Well, okay, it's almost it's about the last week you can ski. So I made it out to Vail, Colorado. And so this morning we were first chair and there was nobody else on the mountain. It was me and two women. And I was just like the most excited ever. Nobody was on the mountain.
Oh, so you were skiing this morning?
I was skiing this morning. I'm literally in my thermals.
You're so funny. Do you still have your ski boots on?
No, but I have my socks on. I got everything on. I still have everything on. Well, yeah. So I literally came from the mountain. I made everyone stop at a certain time so we can book it home. And here I am. So yeah.
Yeah. And then
balance play.
Yeah. It was a little stressful.
Really, what was stressful is my really bad communication skills of saying, I'm because our producer came on and was like, hey, if you want to check your tech, then, come on. And that's when I replied, I'm not even home yet. And then my next one was, I'm in Colorado. And then the next one is, I'm driving. And everyone's like,
yeah.
What?
Are you
driving? I realized that sounded like I was driving from Colorado to California. And I was like, I have to tell him I'm getting back to my home base. I'll be there. Don't worry. But that was so funny because I thought I was, at least giving you guys relief. I'm going to be there.
Yeah.
But it was so cryptic. I'm so sorry.
And it also explains Nikki's sort of granular audio. She's coming from her hotel room in Colorado after skiing. And this morning, did you have a cup of coffee before you went out there?
I don't drink coffee.
You don't?
I don't drink any caffeine whatsoever. I don't drink any sort of Red Bulls, no Celsius, no, not really even tea. Although I like tea, but I do herbal tea, no caffeine,
Uh-huh.
Yeah, no, coffee's never been a thing for me, but God, everyone's always like, my cup of coffee, I have to have it. If I don't, then I'm the worst, person alive. And I'm just like, what? I don't know. Coffee freaks me out.
There is a little bit of an addictive factor to it. I don't drink a lot of coffee. I drink one, I guess it would be the equivalent of a grande at Starbucks, just black coffee. Grande is I don't know. It's
is that 16 ounces or something like that?
I don't know. It's the second biggest one.
20 ounces.
Venti's the big thing. But
Venti
grande
is 20 in
yeah.
I don't know if it's Spanish or Italian.
Oh, is it?
That's 20. Yes.
No, I didn't know that. Okay.
Venti.
I learned a little Italian today. So I get my grande, which I guess maybe it means 16 in Italian then.
Yes, 16.
And then I dump and then I put 5 grams of creatine in there to make it taste even worse than just black coffee.
The Hab creatine is good.
Yeah, and then I put an ice cube in there and I chug it because I don't really like coffee. I drink it to wake up in the morning, and I only drink one cup. Yeah, I do.
If I meditate first thing in the morning, I feel so refreshed and welcome to the day.
Yeah, I'm not built like you. I need coffee. But
I think those people just said the same thing you did.
Yeah.
Yeah, save it, girl. We need our cup. I'm like, okay, fine.
And the thing is, though, that some people feel guilty about their coffee, but it's, and listen, it's the most.
They spend so much money on coffee. I'm sure their coffee budget.
Well, and they're just wondering, is it good for me? Is it not good for me? I mean, it's the most widely consumed beverage globally. And as it turns out, it actually may be good for us. And there's actually quite a bit of data on this. out there. There's
I think there was that like remember that epigenetics or that like oh that test that I would take that said my
yeah, your epigenetic skin. You had an
yeah, that
epigenetics
said the
test for
age,
your
right?
skin. Yeah,
So when I did that, it asked me about coffee, and I said, "No, I don't drink coffee." And they recommended that I
right.
have a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And I was like, "I don't want no friggin' coffee." Like,
Well,
maybe
here's
I don't
why. Because
okay.
there are multiple large-scale meta-analyses,
Uh-huh.
which are meta-analyses are basically studies that compile a lot of other studies, so they end up with even more data and
Okay.
more strength, that have found that quote unquote moderate coffee consumption, and they're talking about, more than I even drink, which is 3 to 5 cups per day,
Oh, no.
is associated with lower risk of cardiovascular disease and stroke, lower risk of type 2 diabetes, lower risk of liver disease, specifically of the kind that you see in metabolic syndrome, the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Mm. Why?
There is a link to reduction in Parkinson's disease and potentially protective effects against Alzheimer's disease as well.
Huh.
So
So why?
okay, well, it's a good question
Yeah.
because this is it's not entirely known, but here's an interesting thing because and I should point out too that there's situations where you don't, coffee can also obviously if you're drinking it within generally after 2 p.m., it's probably not a
Oh,
great
your
idea.
sleep will go downhill. I would say
Yeah.
stop drinking after noon.
Yeah.
Like, at noon, cut it off, I would say.
Yeah. For most people, I think that is true. Like for
Mm.
me, I mean, I could drink coffee right before bed
Some
and
people like that, I've
yeah,
heard,
I
yeah.
I it's like a high metabolizer of caffeine. It does very little for me after waking me up.
Well, if
Anyway, so I should just point out that coffee drinking does increase the risk of miscarriage or low birth weight too. So if you're pregnant, it's not such a great idea. And so that's one thing to be aware of. So anyway, here's the thing.
everything in
So
moderation.
yeah, well, that's right, moderate, and and obviously, if you're pregnant, you probably don't want to drink very much.
Or just
Yeah.
yeah, not at all.
So,
They need their
s-
sleep anyway.
so what's and the other thing I should point out that that is a negative here though
Mhm.
is that consuming unfiltered coffee. So that would be like French press,
Which is amazing.
Turkish. It's a little different. You use a little thing and it's
Turkish is my favorite type of coffee.
Yeah, that is the kind that does have a little negative to it, which it can actually increase LDL cholesterol levels.
Huh.
So that's just something to say. Now, but to your point about what is it that is so good about it?
Where
So a lot of people say, well, it's caffeine. Well, caffeine must be good for you. As it turns out, caffeinated and decaffeinated coffee, they offer many of the same benefits.
hmm,
Yeah.
okay. So it must
So
be the bean.
yeah, there's some other stuff in there. There's some
Yeah,
polyphenols,
okay.
which can reduce oxidative stress and inflammation in the body. There are, some of those things that, increase LDL also happen to be anti-cancer and anti-inflammatory as well. And so there is, there's some names to these things like
Mhm.
diterpenes and trigonelline and melanodins and
All
all
the
that stuff.
blah,
But
blah.
bottom line is that these are independent of the caffeine. So if you don't want caffeine
You
and
did
you do still want the benefit of, some of this, these studies showing the benefit of coffee, then go ahead. But
so
personally,
I'm
I like the caffeine.
yeah, well, yeah, some people just do it for the
Mm,
pick me up. My dad actually only drinks decaf, I found out, and I was really shocked about that. But,
yeah.
just because, like, why do you drink it if it's just
Well,
decaf?
yeah, it's like drinking non-alcoholic beer.
Yeah, whatever, I don't get it. But I want to really okay, so in my like, I have had a real health journey, especially a couple years ago, it started, and I learned so much, uh a very good focus on coffee. Now, one of the biggest things, like, we're dealing with a lot of, like, heavy metal. You're finding heavy metals, and you're finding, a lot of mold in people recently. If you like, I feel like I've hear about that so much. Just like our food on selecting, like, organic and whole foods and good things that are for us, not just, like, any old bag of processed broccoli or whatever, like, get the real deal. There is mold also in different types of coffee from the coffee bean that's being grown, and mold, that's how a lot of people have this mold in their body. So you want to there are a few companies out there who do this third-party testing, making sure that there is no mold. And that's like that I would say get that coffee because get the organic, like, third party tested for mold because that's like a lot of people are having mold in their system because of this consumption frequency of coffee that it brings into our system. Are you aware of that?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that it is an issue, but it's also like one of those things that I feel like you hear, um, you
I've
know,
heard a lot of doctors talk to me about it. Like, I've
yeah,
talked to a lot of people about it because I was
yeah,
like, "What?" And then it freaked me out for my dad because, like I said, he literally will drink, like, so much a day, and so I went on a whole thing to make sure that he was getting, like, a specific coffee that was, like, not having mold because 'cause you're just drinking
yeah.
milk the whole
I mean,
time.
I think getting, quality products of anything that you're
Yep.
gonna put in your
Best point.
body is a good idea. So
Best point.
anyway, so
Yeah.
maybe you gotta start, start having a little bit of decaf or something, and then
I'll get
meditate.
cold free, like, maybe once in a while, like, home
Yeah.
did stuff, because, again, like I was saying with when I mentioned heavy metals, another thing that I learned from all these from, like, different doctors and stuff is,
Mhm.
like, what we don't think about, people go to Starbucks all the time, right? And they have this machine, this coffee machine that is running 24/7
Mhm.
with hot liquids through metal, and that is another way that heavy metals get into our system.
Yeah.
Not nuts?
Interesting.
And these
Interesting.
like, it's just like all these, like,
Yeah.
quote, unquote, "convenient factors" are, like, killing me.
They're
But
like little, they're little bombs going off everywhere in a minefield.
exactly.
What are you gonna do
Exactly.
about it? I
I
don't
know.
know. I don't know,
Just
I
at
think
least be
to
aware of it.
me
So, you're
yeah,
welcome.
I try not to, stress out too much in my life about, as many of those things that you can do. I mean, even we talked about microplastics and all that. You make the
Yes.
big difference. You make the big changes,
Yes.
Just stop drinking out of plastic water bottles. Just look
Mhm.
around the house and look
Stop
at make
microwaving those
stop
things.
microwaving, plastic and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But inevitably, you got to live your life too. So,
But it is
um,
all about lifestyle changes, which I
yeah.
believe we're going to definitely dive into.
Oh
This
yes,
is
yes,
I'm
indeed.
so excited. Yes.
Yeah.
So I'll say we're gonna take a quick break, and when we come back, we're gonna dive into Alzheimer's and brain health and one of the most influential voices in lifestyle medicine, Dr. Dean Ornish. Welcome back to Longevity Junky. It's time for our guest interview, The Breakdown with Dr. Dean Ornish. Dr. Dean Ornish is a pioneering physician and researcher known for his lifestyle based approach to chronic disease. In recent years, his work has turned toward Alzheimer's disease, where he's leading one of the first clinical trials to show that comprehensive lifestyle changes, including whole food, plant based diet, moderate exercise, stress management, and social connection, can not only slow the process of Alzheimer's, but in some cases may actually help reverse cognitive decline. His protocol challenges conventional thinking by demonstrating the powerful impact of non pharmaceutical interventions on brain health. Thank you so much, Dr. Ornish, for joining us. I know we have a little time, so I want to just dive right in and get to it. Alzheimer's disease. That is, I feel, on everybody's mind. On everyone's mind. That's kind of funny. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's worried about it. And how exactly is this clinically different from other forms of dementia? Because a lot of people, I feel, get kind of confused on these two terms.
Yeah, well, you're right. It's something that's devastating, and it's the most common form of dementia. It occurs when amyloid, which is kind of a protein that kind of gunks up, it short circuits your brain, makes it harder and harder to think. And there's another protein called tau that does something similar. And it's frightening because right now there have been billions of dollars that have been spent in the last 20 years to develop drugs to move amyloid out of the brain with the idea that if they could do that, that would improve your ability to think. Only 3 drugs have been approved in the last 20 years. One was taken off the market, but all 3 just slow down the rate at which you get worse because the amyloid is really only one of many mechanisms that cause Alzheimer's. In fact, they're underlying biological mechanisms that are common to so many of the most common and costly chronic diseases, things like chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, changes in the microbiome, the 100 trillion cells that live in our gut, changes in, immune function and telomeres and angiogenesis and overstimulation of the sympathetic nervous system that are really common among so many of the most common and costly chronic diseases, of which amyloid is the latest. So we did a randomized controlled trial published a few months ago showing for the first time that any intervention can often not just slow down the rate of getting Alzheimer's, but often stop and in many cases improve cognition and function in a sense to begin reversing early stage Alzheimer's disease. And so that's really giving many people new hope and new choices because we also found, I almost fell off my chair when I looked at our data and found that the amyloid was also being moved out of the brain in the people in our study. But in addition to that, we found that we're also changing all these other biological mechanisms. So the drugs just focus on amyloid, that slows it down. The lifestyle changes move the amyloid plus all these other mechanisms, which is why it works even better.
So I have a question for you, just related to the idea of beta amyloid plaques and tau. When I was in medical school, I was taught that these were causal, that these were, the reasons that ultimately people got Alzheimer's. I think your work is suggestive, at least, that maybe these are might not be causal, but rather downstream of another sort of metabolic process like insulin resistance. Can you help me understand a general framework for the way you think about those proteins versus some of the other potential causal mechanisms?
Well, I think they're a cause, but not the cause. I think that, again, the drugs do have some benefit when they help move amyloid out of the brain, but not enough even to stop the disease from getting worse. And, getting worse more slowly is still getting worse. And so the suicide rate within the first month or two after being diagnosed with Alzheimer's is 7 times higher because, they say, I'm sorry, it's only going to get worse, get your affairs in order. And so they take your hope away. And then more often than not, and then your world starts to shrink, don't wander off and you have to take away your car keys. And when you lose your hope and when you lose your memories, you lose everything. And that's why it's so depressing. And that's why I'm really so excited by the research because we're able to show for the first time that any intervention can often not just slow it down, but often in many cases stop and even improve cognition and function. We found using one of the 4 tests we used in our study called the Clinical Global Impression of Change, which is, to me, I think it's one of the most clinically meaningful because they not only interview the patient, but also their spouse or caregiver. And we found that 42% of the people in the intervention group actually showed improvement in just 20 weeks, and 71% stopped or improved. Whereas in the usual care control group, none of the patients got better. About a third stayed the same and 2/3 got worse. So these findings are giving really many people real hope and new choices that they didn't have before.
Yeah, so you're touching on your recent study that is this, your lifestyle interventions and how it's improving cognition in early Alzheimer's patients. And you were mentioning how, oh my gosh, the doctors and everyone just start to give your hopes up. And then also I feel like the people around you will also start to treat you different and already just kind of have this, oh, it's going to be a tough ride, and everyone's kind of preparing for the worst. So I'm really excited to hear that there's actually an intervention where you're having some breakthroughs, and I would love for you to walk us through this protocol and this key findings because this gives people hope. You're restoring hope back in people with Alzheimer's, and I think that that's so beautiful.
Yeah, to be able to see people's light get rekindled is really exciting. I mean, we hear stories from people like stories alone are anecdotal, but when you have the science data as well, I think it gives an idea of what does this really mean? Well, for example, people say things like, I used to love reading books, but I had to stop because I'd read the same paragraph over and over again. I couldn't remember what I was reading, or I couldn't watch a movie because I couldn't follow the plot, or I couldn't make food because I kept leaving the burners on or whatever. And not everybody gets better, but we did find there was a dose-response correlation between the degree of change in lifestyle and the degree of improvement on cognition. And what really amazed me was that we found the same dose-response correlation. The more people change their lifestyle, the more it moved amyloid out of their brain. So that gives it more biological plausibility. So the intervention, to answer your question, is essentially, it's the same one we've used for 47 years in all of our studies, the same one that we found could reverse. I mean, everything we've done over the last 47 years, people thought was impossible. And the reason why I spend so much of my time doing these studies is that properly done, working with the most well-respected collaborators published in the leading peer-reviewed journals, we can often redefine what was thought impossible as possible. And by doing so, we can now give many people, as we said, new hope and new choices. So back when we were studying heart disease, for example, people thought heart disease was much the way that people view Alzheimer's today, that at the time, people thought once you had it, the best you could do was slow down the rate at which you got worse. And we found that if you make bigger changes on a lot of things at the same time, instead of getting worse and worse, in many cases, people got better and better. Again, in the dose-response correlation, the more you change, the better you get at any age. And so the lifestyle, and we found that with type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, early stage prostate cancer. We did a study with Craig Venter where we found when you change your lifestyle, it actually changes your genes. In effect, turning on the genes that keep us healthy and down-regulating or turning off the genes that, especially the genes that cause these biological mechanisms that we've been talking about, like chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, and so on, that are common to all of these different underlying diseases. When I gave my TED Talk, I showed a tree with different branches, and they all have these different diseases in the branches. But underneath the roots are, an unhealthy diet, being sedentary, chronically stressed, and socially isolated. And when we nourish the roots of the tree, it begins to change the branches. It's mediated through these same biological mechanisms. So it's a diet that's essentially a whole foods, plant-based diet that's low in fat, refined carbs, and processed foods, moderate exercise, meditation and other yoga-based stress management techniques, and support groups, or to reduce it to its essence, to eat well, move more, stress less, and love more. And I think our unique contribution has been using these very high-tech, expensive, state-of-the-art scientific measures to prove how powerful these very simple and low-tech and low-cost interventions can be.
I love that you focus on lifestyle as opposed to going a medication route, because it's true, like calming your nervous system through meditation and yoga and always moving, always making sure that you're like movement and whole foods are very much, in my opinion, like the real whole medicine that help people really flourish. And it's all simple. It's not as expensive as all these other medications that you're going through all the time. And what with this study, what were your key findings exactly? Was it just changing those environmental processes, or did it go any deeper than that?
No, that was the intervention. And, I helped create the field of what's called lifestyle medicine, which is using lifestyle to help prevent, treat, and often reverse the progression of so many of the most common and costly chronic diseases. Certainly drugs have their place. I'm well trained as an internal medicine doctor, but they don't usually treat the underlying causes.
Yeah.
And our bodies often have this remarkable capacity to begin healing if you really treat the causes, which more often than not are these lifestyle choices that we're making. So if people are listening to this and are interested in learning more about our work, just go to ornish.com.
I'm curious a little bit about specifically in that protocol, a very low fat, whole food, plant-based diet. And obviously, I think for most of history, I think it seems that that's what we've been emphasizing in medicine. But as you know, recently there's been a lot of talk about ketogenic diets, diets that might, that might actually, in some people's mind, the ketogenic diet, they're showing that they may have some improvement in people with problems with cognition. Can you kind of extricate some of this? It's hard, I think, for listeners and frankly for me, because it seems like there's some smart people kind of saying very different things.
There's so many different diet recommendations, and everyone's like, what do I do?
Right. Well, the reason I spend so much of my time doing these clinical trials, and they're really hard to do, they're hard to get funded, because we're trying to prove something that people think is impossible. So like, why should we give you money to do your study? Everybody knows it can't be done. Without the funding, you can't start works and vice versa. But the reason why I do that is that's the whole point of science, if we try to sort out what's true and what isn't. People can say all kinds of things. No one's ever done a randomized trial of the ketogenic diet showing that it can improve cognition in people with Alzheimer's disease. But we did find, for example, that in the biomarkers in our study, that the ketone bodies it had many of the effects of a ketogenic diet. But the ketogenic diet can be done in a healthy way or an unhealthy way. If you replace, I think there's a common agreement that refined carbs like sugar and white flour and white rice are not good choices for most people, because
Right.
when you go from, say, brown rice to white rice, or from whole wheat flour to white flour, you're removing the fiber and the bran that ordinarily fill you up before you get to many calories, but they also slow the rate of absorption from food into your gut. If you remove that, you can get these, wide swings in blood sugar and the insulin responses, which can then promote inflammation, which can promote all these different conditions. But it's what you replace the refined carbs with, I think, that makes a difference, is whether it's healthy or not. So if you replace it with, pork rinds and bacon and sausage and things like that, like Atkins and other acolytes after that said, those are not good choices because they can increase your risk of getting so many different conditions. But if you replace it with good carbs, fruits and vegetables and whole grains and legumes and so on, first of all, they're high in fiber, so you don't get these wide swings in sugar. You just get, nice, slow and coming up and down. But there are literally thousands of substances in fruits and vegetables that have anti-cancer, anti-heart disease, even anti-aging properties. You mentioned, Buck, that you're interested in anti-aging sorts of things. We did the first randomized trial with Elizabeth Blackburn, who, as you know, got the Nobel Prize for discovering telomeres, of our chromosomes that regulate cellular aging. And she'd done a number of studies with Alyssa Epple and others showing that, for example, women under chronic stress because they had kids with autism, or people who ate junk food or smoked or were sedentary, their telomeres got shorter faster. And as your telomeres get shorter, your life gets shorter, and your risk of all these different diseases goes up proportional to that. So we met one day, and I said, if bad things make your telomeres shorter, maybe good things make them longer. And so we did a study, and we published this in the Lancet Oncology, and we found that it was the first intervention showing that the first study showing that any intervention could often lengthen telomeres. We could increase telomerase, the enzyme that repairs and lengthens telomeres, by 30% in just 3 months. And over a 5-year period, we found they actually got longer, as they got shorter in the usual care group. And so whatever prism we're looking at this through, whether it's your telomeres or your gene expression or these different chronic diseases, a healthy whole foods plant-based diet that's low in refined carbs gives you the benefits of the ketogenic diet. But if you replace it with good carbs and healthy fats and things like that, then you're going to get the benefits without the toxicities of replacing it with meat.
Yeah, one thing that I think is just interesting to note for people who are listening, we're talking about Alzheimer's because some of your work on that that we have not covered. But you are internationally famous for pioneering research demonstrating really that comprehensive lifestyle changes, specifically, I guess, that, the low fat, whole food, plant-based diet, along with moderate exercise, stress management, social support. You're not only affecting the outcomes in neurodegenerative disease, but also chronic disease like coronary artery disease. I think there was some things with prostate cancer as well.
Yes.
And so what do you think if there was a common denominator to all of this, ultimately is a variable, do you think it comes down to something as simple as like inflammation, or is there just no way to put some common denominator to all of this?
Well, the common denominators are the ones we've been talking about: chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, changes in the microbiome, in telomeres, in gene expression, angiogenesis, immune function, overstimulation of the sympathetic nervous system, all of which are lifestyle related. And so you can get better quickly. They're very dynamic. You can get better quickly. You can get worse quickly. Medicare has been now covering our program initially in hospitals and clinics, and more recently, for the last several years, we can do that in people's home. So people with heart disease who have interest in doing this, who they have Medicare, and now other insurance companies like Blue Shield and Aetna and others are covering it as well. So now we can really scale this and make it available to the people who most need it. Again, that's on the Ornish.com. But it's all mediated by these same biological mechanisms, which in turn are directly influenced for better and for worse. They're very dynamic in both directions. You can get better quickly, you can get worse quickly, depending on what you eat and how you live and how you, the social support you have, lack of exercise and stress management. They all affect all these diseases via these same biological mechanisms.
And I really want to touch on like the food part of it, because I feel that's definitely like every day we have to eat. Like that's the most common thing that we're definitely doing or need to do for survival. And so I want to go back to your study. I know that it was low in processed foods. I basically say try and get all the processed foods out. Anything packaged, throw it out, you want whole foods. And don't go through drive-throughs. But, was your study also with vegan? Is it and having a plant-based nutrition, like, is that critical within the study?
Well, it's very important. Again, all four components are important. People sometimes think, oh, it's all diet. Well, the diet's important, but so are the other components.
Mhm.
And I think that, again, the diet that we use is low in the things that are bad for you and high in the things that are protective. So you get a double benefit. When you go from eating a typical American diet to the diet we recommend, you're not only reducing the intake of substances that cause you harm, but you're also getting the intake of thousands of substances that are actually protective, as we talked about earlier, that have anti-cancer, anti-heart disease, even anti-aging properties.
And okay, now and staying with this breakthrough, can you give us an example of a patient who had reversed the Alzheimer's symptoms?
Yeah, in fact, I could, if I put something on, can I share my screen with you? All right.
With the reading, I had lost that ability. I could not retain information. I would forget who the characters were. I'd forget what order things were going in, and it just got unique. Um, one humiliating for me, but it just became too difficult to put that from this point to do that. I gave up cooking for a long time, doing those kind of things. And so that has started to come back. This was
We'd say around week 12 would be an
yeah.
estimate.
So we've got several small businesses, property management, and I used to do all the books for that, and obviously didn't. And then this year, I created spreadsheets.
It was astonishing. They were not only all categorized in a proper order, beneficial order, more importantly, they were all done correctly.
Yeah.
And for me and for Tammy, it was like
Yeah,
absolute jubilation.
it was.
Exciting. Do you realize what you just accomplished?
I think that deep sense of identity is returning. It's given me like a new lease on life, and yet it's a familiarity and something I always prided myself in. And so it's like, yes, I'm coming back. It was really good, like I was prior to the disease being diagnosed. Yeah, an older but better version of me. Yeah, I really feel that way.
Were you able to see that okay? Hopefully?
Yeah,
Oh my gosh, that was so beautiful.
that was
And s
fantastic.
and what was one of the like, did she have to change everything that you're about your life about her lifestyle, or was there really key things that really worked for her?
Yeah, well, the reason why we've been first to show you can reverse so many of these different diseases, most recently Alzheimer's, is that it's hard. It's the pound of cure, if you will, although I wouldn't call it cure. It takes a lot to reverse a chronic disease. So the
It's like
people,
it takes even more to live with one.
even more what?
Even more effort, more energy, more depression, more like
Oh, yeah.
it's
Well, I
hard
think,
like you're saying, it's hard to implement a lot of these sometimes, but it's even harder to live with the disease, I think.
well, for sure. And especially with Alzheimer's, because nothing else works. So if you had a choice between, eating a plant-based diet or having your memory fade away, I mean, to me, that's an easy choice, but not always for everyone. But, Sanjay Gupta did a 1 hour, did a documentary on our work. He filmed some of the patients over a 5-year period and found that one patient he followed, it was they called the last Alzheimer's patient. And it was on CNN it was Sanjay Gupta doing it with Anderson Cooper, and found that this one patient, for example, did it for 5 years, and she's even better now than she was 5 years earlier. Now that's just one patient, but
Yeah.
we find that the more you change, the more you improve. But to get in reversal, it takes really big changes. Now, to prevent disease, you don't have to make such big changes. You don't have to do them all at once. You don't have to do it so intensively. But to reverse it, we found that there is a dose-response correlation, but when you go from slowing it down to actually stopping or improving requires really big changes. But they're doable. To me, it's like, I mean, we have one guy who, for example, was on the heart transplant list. This is a guy who was a doctor, is a doctor, and he was told that only a new heart would keep him alive. He had such a massive heart attack, so much of his heart was damaged that only a new heart would keep him alive. And while looking for a donor, he went through my program for 9 weeks, and after 9 weeks, his heart improved so much he didn't need a heart transplant. So, like, that's kind of more extreme.
That's really fast.
Like
That
what's
is
his ejection fraction, the percent of blood the heart was pumping, went from between 11 and 15% to over 30%. And that was 7 years ago, and he's still doing it. He'd probably be on a second heart transplant by now.
There's no drug that can possibly do that in 2 months or 3 months.
You know,
No.
it's like, well, I mean, people say, "Oh, your program's so like radical." Like, well, what's the more radical
Yeah.
intervention here? A new heart, or eat well, move more, stress?
Right, that's so true.
So when do you must have in some situations non-responders, and I'm curious what things stand out, or if anything stands out amongst those individuals who don't respond as well to the protocol.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because I don't want to imply that everybody gets better. I mean, in the Alzheimer's study, 71% of the patients stopped to reverse the progression of their disease, but 29% got worse. Now, there's a certain element of it's two things. One is we did find in all of our studies that the more you change your lifestyle, the more you improve. It is a dose-response relationship at any age. I initially thought that the younger people who had less severe disease in general, of all these different diseases, would do better, but it was really more a function of the degree of change. But there is a certain element of mystery to all of this. Not everybody gets better. We don't understand everything. But it's amazing how many people do when you make these changes. And you mentioned a study we did on prostate cancer. We did a study with Peter Carroll, who's the chair of urology at UCSF, where I'm a professor, and Bill Fair, when he was the chair of urology at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. And we found that men who had early stage prostate cancer, who made these same lifestyle changes, could, in a sense, slow, stop, and in some cases improve their function. We found their PSA levels, a marker for prostate cancer, went down. And when we added their serum, their blood, to a standard line of prostate tumor cells growing in tissue culture, we found that the tumor, imagine a tumor that's growing in a petri dish in a tissue culture. You add the blood of someone who's changed their lifestyle to it, and it inhibited the growth by 70%, 70, compared to people in the usual care control randomized control group who would only inhibit it by like a fraction of that, by 9%. So when you make these lifestyle changes, there's something that happens in your blood that actually inhibits the growth of the tumor. And what's true for prostate cancer would likely be true for women with the less aggressive forms of early stage breast cancer as well. So we've raised as many questions as we've answered, but overall these findings, I think, are really, as we've talked about, really empowering people with really science-based, not false hope, but really new hope and new choices in areas that matter most, that in the case of Alzheimer's, the drugs really only slow things down. Now, I'm hoping that eventually the drugs will get better, and maybe, further down the road, the combination of drugs plus lifestyle may be the best treatment for Alzheimer's. Like for many patients, statins plus lifestyle may be better, if you have a particularly aggressive form of the disease. But right now, the lifestyle changes in the case of Alzheimer's are actually working better than the drugs.
Is there, in terms of response, did it make a difference whether somebody was ApoE4 carrier?
Well, that's a good question. The new drugs like the lecanemab and donanemab and others are contraindicated if you have both of the Alzheimer's genes. You have a very high likelihood of getting Alzheimer's in the 70 to 80% rate. That woman that I just showed you the video had both of the Alzheimer's genes. She wasn't even considered a candidate for the drugs because the drugs cause so much bleeding in the brain.
So she was homozygous.
Homozygous for the ApoE4.
Okay.
But if you have one of the Alzheimer's gene, it's 16 to 20% higher. But the drugs really work better in men than women, even though twice as many women as men get Alzheimer's. And the effect is, according to many people, just kind of imperceptible. You don't really see much of a change in their function. So they're very expensive. They're $20,000 to $30,000 a year per person. 21% get what I call ARIA, bleeding into your brain or brain swelling or things like that. Whereas the lifestyle changes don't just slow it down, but stop and often improve it at a fraction of the cost. And the only side effects are really good ones, like your heart disease gets better and things like that.
Yeah.
Mentioning things being so radical and changing, and but what is so radical? Is it just doing something different, or is there something in your protocol that makes people go, "Oh my god, I can't do that?"
Well, radical really comes from the Latin root, so it is radical in the sense that we're really getting at the root of the problem. But in
Mm,
terms of the degree of change, I mean, I don't think it's radical. I've been eating a vegetarian plant-based diet since I was 19, and I grew up in Texas eating meat all the time,
mm,
just because I felt so much better. I could think more clearly. And,
mhm,
other people are finding that their brain gets more blood, they think more clearly, there's brain cells called neurogenesis. Your brain can actually regenerate in some ways. Your
mm.
skin gets more blood, so you look younger. I'm 96, I think I look pretty good. No, just kidding. But I'm 71. Your heart gets more blood, your sexual organs get more blood, all the things that so what you gain is and if you have heart disease, your chest pain or angina, we found a 92% reduction in the frequency of chest pain in just a few weeks, in 3 weeks, when people make these changes. And so it reframes the reason we're making lifestyle changes from fear of dying to joy of living. There's no point in giving up something that you like unless you get something back that's better and
Mhm.
quickly. So let's say you've got angina and we can't play with your kids or make love with your partner or go back to work or even walk across the street without getting chest pain. And then in the next, 3 weeks later, you can do all those things. People say things like, I like eating junk food, but not that much, because what I gain is so much more than what I give up. I've just found that fear is not really a sustainable motivator in politics or in life in general. When someone's first diagnosed with a chronic disease, they'll do pretty much anything that their doctor or nurse or dietitian tells them for maybe, a few weeks or so, and then they tend to go back to their old ways. Well, why is that? Because, fear is not sustainable. We all know we're going to die at some point, but we don't think about it most of the time because it's too scary. Like the mortality rate is still, 100%. It's one per person, but we don't think about it. So I've just found that efforts to motivate people out of fear maybe in the short run work, but they don't work in the long run. What does work in the long run is feeling better and love and pleasure and social support. And, if you make the paradox is when you make big changes, sometimes it's actually easier. Because if you make moderate changes, you're making enough change to not feel like you're doing everything you want to do, but you're not making big enough changes to see much benefit. But when you make big changes in a lot of things all at once, you feel so much better so quickly in ways that really matter. For many people, those are choices worth making. And they say things like, even if I knew I wouldn't live a day longer, I would do it just because the quality of my life is so much better, that what I gain is so much more than what I give up.
So one question I just in terms of these responders like you're having, I mean, obviously, it was a pretty remarkable video you showed us. If they continue on this, do some of them still show some relapse, or are they generally speaking,
Improving.
staying away from disease?
The ones who stay with it, who stay on the program, like the one that Sanjay Gupta, Dr. Gupta, who's a brain surgeon. He's a neurosurgeon himself. He's a professor at Emory. So he was a great person to do the documentary.
Yeah.
He found this one person for 5 years, and then she's actually doing better than she was, 5 years before. Again, there's an element to mystery in all of this, but in general, the more you change and the longer you do it, the more you continue to either maintain those improvements or in some cases get even better.
Were you guys following her over those 5 years in terms of MRI as well? I mean, could you see those amyloid plaques and tau plaques continue to regress
We
even
didn't
out
have the
that far?
funding to do MRIs or PET scans, but the biomarkers are so well correlated with changes in PET scans and MRIs that for many patients they're considered a really valid surrogate.
And your program, you say it's delivered via telehealth. Can you tell us, who might be really good candidates for this and just more information on
And
it?
how
Because
to
I feel
sign up if it
like
makes
yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Can we
Yeah,
all just sign up?
Yeah.
I thought if we just did good science, that would change medical practice, and to some degree it did. But what really changes medical practice is changing reimbursement. Because people need to make a living. So it took
Mm.
many years, but Medicare created a new benefit category to cover my program for reversing heart disease. At first, we were doing this in hospitals and clinics, and then when COVID hit, we began doing it virtually. And I thought it was too high touch to do virtually, and unfortunately, I was wrong. It worked even better. So
Mm.
now we can offer the program to people anywhere in the country in the comfort of your own home. Before, at best, you had to live within driving distance, but people, had to take off work or get childcare, and now you can just do it from home. And we actually send you your first 2 weeks of meals free as part of that.
Oh,
So
wow.
while you're learning how to cook and shop and eat out and so on, you can,
Mm.
just eat the food we give you. And most people find they feel so much better. Their angina goes away in just those few weeks. Then that really It's them invested in wanting to continue it. So
Oh.
if you have heart disease, if you have one of 7 criteria, which, angina is enough, chest pain, or if you've had a stent or a bypass or a heart failure or a heart-lung transplant or valve repair, or things like that, any one of these things makes you eligible. If you're interested, go to ornish.com. It's all there. And then Medicare will cover 80% of the cost. And if you have supplemental insurance, which most people do, it'll pay all of it. And so what
Can
gets
people
me
do
out
it
of it,
electively? Dr. Ornish, can people just do it electively if they, they like what they hear?
you mean who don't have heart disease?
Yeah. There's
Yeah, they
people
can
who are
do it.
looking at preventative stuff and just want to be part of the program.
Yeah,
That's a
well, I mean, it's the same program that's in all of my books. So for
Right.
$15, you can get a copy of the Undo It book that I wrote with my
There you go.
partner, Ann, of 28 years.
Mhm.
So it's all there. And you don't have to be, you don't have to be so intensive to prevent disease as you do to reverse it.
Right.
That's
What
true.
matters most is your overall way of eating and living. So if you indulge yourself one day, eat healthier the next. You don't have time to exercise one day, do a little more the next. It's a much more relaxed thing. But if you're trying to reverse it, it is more prescriptive. And that's why we wanted to give people the support. So it's twice a week, 4 hours at a time for 9 weeks. So at each session, you get an hour of exercise, an hour of support group. And the support group isn't just helping people stay on the diet. It's a powerful intervention in its own right. We create a sense of community where people can feel safe and let down their emotional defenses and talk openly about what's really going on in their lives. The exercise, the support group, the meditation, and a lecture, usually by a dietitian. So it's a lot. It's twice a week, 4 hours at a time for 9 weeks. But by the end of it, we find that 92% of the people finish all 72 hours, which was unheard of. As we know, I mean, like only a third of people are taking their statins after a couple months. So, and the reason is because, again, you feel so much better. And the support group that you have is so meaningful. The real epidemic isn't just heart disease, it's loneliness and isolation and depression. And because of the breakdown of the social networks that used to give that to people. And online, it's not the same thing because, when you have real intimacy, like in our support groups or growing up in a family or in a neighborhood or an extended family, that they know where you, not just your wonderful bio sketch, but they also know where you messed up and, where you got busted or you got, you got rehab or whatever it is. And that they know, and they know that that they know. And there's just something really powerful. Like I see all of you and I'm still there for you. And like, if you go on Instagram or Facebook, most people aren't posting that stuff. They're just posting like, it looks like everybody has this perfect life but you.
Right.
And so be putting people in a support group where there's a sense of trust that what goes in the group stays in the group. There's a sense of confidentiality that's rigid. And so people can feel safe and they can really talk about what's going on in their lives in ways that many people don't have anywhere else to do that because they don't have those extended families or neighborhoods or friends that they trust like that. And for many people, it's the part of our program, that the love more part, if you will, that people think like, what is that about, But it's invariably the part that's the most meaningful because that need for connection and community is a fundamental primal human need that so often goes unfulfilled.
I want to just mention once more for Dr. Dean Ornish, he also has this book that he's written called Undo It. And for those of you who are inspired and, again, are really into the preventative side.
Yeah, there it is. I'm going to go get my own copy. I love it.
Thank you so much for being on our show today and love to have you again sometime.
Well, I'd love that very much. To me, awareness is always the first step in healing, and you're doing a great service by raising awareness, and thank you.
Oh my God, we are so blessed to have you. Thank you so much. We totally stand behind everything that you're pushing out there. So thank you for doing what you do. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with our healthy takeout. Welcome back to Longevity Junky. It's time for our healthy takeout.
So really good stuff, right?
Yes.
Really, really interesting. And again, but for me, in some ways, it also creates a lot more confusion too.
Why? For me, it felt like I felt honestly so supported in what I preach. Like what I preach to my family, what I preach to everybody. I'm always trying to be like, you have to eat whole foods. You have to exercise.
Well,
Stop being
I'll tell you exactly why. Because the diet is a low fat, low protein.
It's mostly
low fat, low protein, grains, vegan diet. So to the extent that every, and here's the issue fundamentally in this space is like most of the guys who are out there are talking about,
High
okay,
protein,
high protein,
that
high fat,
high
high,
fat.
like
Mhm.
it's
I know.
my, it is, again, for me, it's actually not what we or I have consistently been saying, because there's no clear answer here, and it's
Yeah.
mine. It's crazy. It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, results in science is science. You see, the guy's got incredible results, and so, obviously, this is one way to skin the cat, at least, right? But it is super fascinating. I think what he's doing, if more people knew about it, I feel like, there's so many people suffering with Alzheimer's, people in their lives who are getting Alzheimer's.
Oh,
I
I
mean,
feel isn't it, like, more than ever now? The
oh
numbers
yeah,
of
because people are getting older too, right? So, I mean,
well, yeah, but I
that's part
mean,
of it
just,
too.
like, the number of Alzheimer cases versus back in the day, I feel like it's
Yeah,
way more I hear about it so much. Like, it's too common.
yeah,
So, yeah. Well, I also think there's a lot more processed foods out there now.
yep,
There's a lot more, so it's just going back to the basics, really.
yeah,
Be connecting with nature, moving your body. Like, don't sit and just watch TV. That's the sedentary part. Like,
right.
have community. So, get off your phones, get off of your computers and stuff, and start going outside and having like real relationships.
Mm-hmm.
That's that pillar of it. So it feels like it's just like really getting back to the basics
Mm-hmm.
and just really eating healthy. Now, I guess for
Again, that's what you say though, is when you say eating healthy,
oh,
that
I was just gonna go into it. I
that
know.
that
I know.
is the incredibly confusing thing for people out there. If it's confusing for me, and
Yeah,
I'm like looking at the data, I'm talking to all these people at, the clinical levels and the scientific levels, and it's confusing for me. It's gonna be confusing for everybody, you
true.
know?
But I don't know why I don't find it as confusing. Like, I understand maybe if someone's getting really technical of portion sizes and what am I gonna really specifically
Okay,
eat,
let me
but
give you an example. Okay,
okay.
uh, Peter Attia and most of the camp on that end will talk about a gram of protein
Right, per
per
body.
pound.
Yep, yep, yep.
That is an enormous amount of protein.
That's true. Yeah.
This is calling for low protein,
Yeah.
right? And so
Mhm.
this is more like Walter Longo's diet, by the way,
Oh, okay.
right? And
Yeah.
it's extremely almost polar opposite to Dr. Robert Lufkin's diet that calls for high fat.
Right.
So therein lies the
Yeah.
confusion,
I hear you. I hear
right?
you. Yeah.
So,
I
but again, it
yeah.
is, I think the one way that you can look at this is there, he's got huge amounts of data, and, he's actually talking the talk and walking the walk with his patients. So it's,
Yeah.
he's got plenty of defense behind what he's advocating for, right?
Yeah, it's that is really interesting because even there's this female researcher and scientist called her name is Dr. Stacy Sims, and
Mm.
she's very focused on female, and she also was saying like a gram,
Yeah,
maybe a little bit more of protein per pound of body weight as
right.
well. So I don't know. In my opinion, like I try not to get too bogged down
Yeah,
with it and stress out because that takes away the quality of life, which is literally what he's trying to instill in us is like love more, less stress. So it's just, I think it just goes to
yeah,
kind of like a balance. Like I don't ever really want to do an all vegan diet. Like, no
right.
offense, not my jam. I love meat. So
Yeah,
I want to have things that are like good, healthy protein. So like I want grass fed beef and things and pasture raised chickens and, local stuff like that that I can trust that doesn't have all these chemicals and that
hmm,
aren't processed. And then just, yeah, make sure you have whole food vegetables and I mean, start a garden. Even that's really
yeah,
therapeutic and meditative and things like that. I mean, so I just try and find the balance within it. And on days, maybe have if like I'm working out a ton, then I'm gonna have more of that protein amount that they're like saying you should
hmm,
get.
Mhm.
And if I'm not, then I'm gonna have a little bit less and maybe just focus a little bit more on, the vegetables and the vegan, I guess you would
Yeah.
say, part. So I don't know, it's just I think life is all about an ebb and flow and feeling good about your choices, so don't stress about your choices.
I'm not stressed.
No, not you, I'm just saying for the people
But
of, like,
I think as, I look at these things very much analytically.
yeah.
And for somebody who looks at things analytically and
And you're like, "What the
you see like very, you know,
contradicting, yeah,
yeah,
arguments from
it's
people who are so renowned and, like, so
yeah,
intelligent
yeah.
and even have studies for both of
And
us.
they have people who they're
Uh,
like reversing disease in, right?
I know.
So I don't know.
Well,
Anyway,
yeah,
but
well,
anyway, again, it's a I think the one thing I think that I'll just put out there is I think obviously he has these results, and so if you know somebody who
yeah,
has a family member
yes.
or you have a family member who's starting to develop Alzheimer's disease and it's covered by Medicare, I mean,
There's
this
no
to
yeah,
me is a no-brainer. Give
no-brainer.
this a try. I mean, I wish, my kid's
Yep.
mom, recently died of Alzheimer's disease in her 90s, and I wish
Your kid's mom's
or
mom.
kid's mom, grandma, my
I
kid's,
was like, okay, I was like,
yeah,
"Don't say your
not my mom, not my ex-wife, her
her mom." Her mom.
her mom was in
Okay.
her 90s. Yeah, no, my ex-wife was
I
in
was
her
like, "God
90s.
dang,
I like older women. Uh, so my ex-wife's mom died. I don't, for some reason, I just don't like using the word ex-wife, but anyway, she is my ex-wife. Her mom died in her 90s and, had Alzheimer's for, gosh, like 15 years.
Really?
And I mean, I wish we'd known about this. That would have been great. She really just, forgot everybody and didn't even know her grandkids, didn't even know her daughter by the end.
Oh my
So,
god, so
yeah.
hard.
So,
No.
anyway, anything else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, this is incredible. I would just say also, I'm excited to get his book. I wanna get his
Yeah.
book.
Yeah, I
That
think
sounds incredible.
I might too. I mean, like,
Yeah.
here's one last thought I'll say is like, because I'm been on the side of generally higher protein, although I've kind of stopped doing that too because I just hear
Mhm.
so much, Walter Longo, you've got,
Mhm.
you've just, you've got a T on one side, Walter Longo, you've got there's two teams diametrically opposed, and so sometimes when I see situations like that,
Mhm.
my feeling is maybe I ought to just be somewhere in the middle and not
Yeah,
be entirely wrong about this. So I've been sort of like not really pushing serious
so much
protein and that kind
protein
of
and stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So anyway, that's all I got. So do you want to read us out?
of course. Longevity Junky is created by Dr. Buck Joffrey, MD. It's executive produced by myself, Nikki Lee, Dr. Buck Joffrey, and Phil Ferragamo. And we're distributed by our friends at ACAST. See you next time.